Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Florence Stainier, and I'm a partner within the investment management practice of Arendt and Ronda. Together with my colleagues, Jasper, Ronda, and Alexandre, Brajou, we are very pleased to welcome you to the last webinar of a series which was dedicated to the AIFMD review and that we have initiated a few weeks ago. Jasper is a senior manager within Arendt Regulatory and Consulting, where he's advising, among other things, clients in the setting up of the AIFM and management company, considering a lot of questions about substance and delegation. Alexandre is a manager also within Arendt Regulatory and Consulting, and is more specialized in risk management questions. And we felt that it would be an asset to rely on their expertise to comment the topic of the day. Before starting, I need to pass a few technical housekeeping messages. Please send us as many questions as you wish. We do really welcome your question. Please use the Q&A session by clicking on the three dots which is on your screen. We will do our best to address this question either during the conversation or at the very end, where we will do a Q&A session. In case you would have any technical issue, please write us in the chat, and our colleagues from support will try to assist you in an appropriate manner. So for the one who have attended the previous session of our webinar series, you will recall that the EU Commission has published on last November, as part of the Capital Market Union package, a proposal for a review of the Alternative Investment Fund Manager Directive. You will see the key dates of the whole process on the slides, and probably if there were more important dates to be kept in mind, starting point is probably to be considered as being the KPMG report on operational of AIFMD, which was published in December 2018, but also an important milestone of the process, also at first sight not necessarily totally related to AIFMD review, was the release by the EU Commission of the CMU action plan in September 2022. And finally, last but not least, as mentioned, there was that proposal which was released in last November, proposal for an amendment of the directive to the EU Parliament and Council. The institutional process has now started. The asset management industry is obviously at large trying to figure how the exact scope of the changes which are expected to be implemented will concretely impact the current business model. In case the package would be adopted in the course of 2022 as expected in the context of the trilogue process, it is consequently expected that the entry into force of the new rules of the AIFMD directive would be either 2024 or 2025, so still a few years to come. As part of the AIFMD review, the EU Commission considered that a number of issues which have been identified in that process could also be relevant for the activities of the UCITS and also for the UCITS management company. As a consequence thereof, the legislative proposal which was issued back in November aims to address the issue by also amending the UCITS directive to better align this framework with the AIFMD1 and to increase convergence in that respect. Hence, that block on the middle of your screen on the slide about that convergence which is expected via this new proposal between AIFMD and UCITS. And this is exactly the topic of the day, to lead you through the proposal which have been introduced in the context of the UCITS and the impact that this could be have in that framework. There are, in a nutshell, three main topics which are covered by the proposal. First of all, the requirements in terms of minimum and stable substance, technical and human substance, within the UCITS management companies, but also an alignment in the context of delegation with expected need to provide objective reasons for extensive delegation, and last but not least, some new requirement expectation in terms of liquidity management tools. In addition to these three main changes, additional changes are also introduced in the context of central securities depositories and also in terms of reporting. Having set the scene, if I can say so, I would like to start with the topic of substance. And Jasper, I would like to ask you if you could tell us what are the proposals of the directive, of the review directive in the context of substance, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Florence. I think the key message to pass is that the requirements that are set out in the proposal, or let's say proposals, that they are identical for AIFMs and UCITS ManCos. And they basically say that the business of an AIFM and or UCITS ManCo must be conducted by at least 2 full-time equivalents. And these 2 full-time equivalents, they can be employed by an investment fund manager, or they can be committed to an investment fund manager.
Thank you. Substance is clearly a hot topic, and it's not new. It has been a hot topic for many years. Some of you will remember probably the intensive discussion we had some time ago about the self-managed model, which was quite popular in Luxembourg. And all these discussions were a little bit a starting point to this consideration, additional consideration and needs of substance, of course, at the level of these self-managed SICAV and companies, but also as a consequence thereof, it has strengthened the expectation in terms of substance at the level of the management companies. Without mentioning, of course, the implementation of the AIFMD directive, which came with some clear expectation as to the level and extent of substance indeed to be kept at the level of the AIFM, and the fact that there were a clear choice to be made between the delegation of risk management and portfolio management. So this has also conducted the CSSF to be a pioneer by issuing the very well-known now Circular 18698, in which they have already addressed many of these requirements, substance requirements, which are in fact already applicable to Luxembourg management company to a large extent. An important milestone, of course, in the evolution of the substance requirement was also the whole Brexit context and the consequence thereof on the substance model. And we all know that it has led to extensive discussion between the CSSF, market practitioner, and also with ESMA to some extent, where some existing models at the time have been reviewed and have been aligned with expectation of the CSSF based on the circular. So, if I understand correctly, at first sight, based on what you have just said, Jasper, the proposal should not create a revolution. It's more to be seen as an alignment with AIFM, and in all means not create an additional burden as compared to the already applicable condition based on that Circular 18698. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's my understanding too. I mean, if you take if we go back to the 2 FTE requirement, what the proposals say is that the 2 FTE can be employed by an AIFM, or that they can be committed to an AIFM. We have the 2 FTE requirement in place already since years with the 18698, and I think also before that in the 12546, we also already had the 2 FTE requirement for conducting persons. And what we see is that most conducting persons, conducting officers with clients are indeed employed by their investment fund manager, and sometimes they are seconded or in any other way committed to an investment fund manager. So in that perspective, there indeed there is no change.
And to be clear, and to clearly state the obvious, maybe, because it could be of interest for many participants in the audience, secondment arrangement should still be accepted.
Correct. I would say so. We do know that the CSF imposes certain conditions on secondment arrangements, and I suspect that that will remain the case, even if it is not stated in the proposal.
Okay. Maybe another precise question to which you might not necessarily have a final and definitive answer, which is about the fact that there is a reference to the need for these convicting officer to be residing in the EU. Some voices have been mentioning that might be a possibility that this would lead to a consideration that all convicting officers would need to be residing in the EU. Any view there? Because I believe it's quite an important topic, and especially for the one having a large number of convicting officers, among which some of them would be based in Switzerland or in UK more particularly.
That really depends, I believe, on the way that you interpret the proposal. So either, as you said, only 2 conducting officers would need to be EU residents, or all of them. My reading is that it should be the 2 conducting officers, but it needs to be clarified, certainly. And we do know that it is something that is currently discussed at several levels.
Okay. That's a fair statement probably, and we will certainly keep that in mind because it's a key point. We understand that this is discussed at some EU levels, and we could have additional insight in a near future, I expect. But at least let's keep on the good news and the fact that there are probably not so many impact to be expected for Luxembourg-based UCITS management company, since they would already be compliant. That's what you said, I believe. Is that right? And then what would be the concrete impact if they are all compliant for the industry?
So I would indeed expect that most UCITS ManCos are already compliant. Same for AIFM, simply because the 18698, which we have since August 2018, is more restrictive than the proposals would be. So that, I mean, there is a little bit on aspects to be considered in application files as well. I have done many application files over the years, and I think what we gradually see is an increase of information and content that goes to the CSSF as part of these application files. But everything that is included in the proposals is already included in the application files, at least that we submit as Arendt to the regulator, for instance, on technical and human resources, roles and reporting lines of conducting persons, and so on. So I would suppose that most UCITS ManCos based in Luxembourg, same for AIFMs, are already in line with these conditions. There might be needs to update programs of activities in order to provide these detailed descriptions if indeed these entities are already sort of situated in Luxembourg. But again, I mean, the circular is very detailed as to how things are organized in an investment fund manager. So there's no real change to that. And I think there should not be any surprises if the proposal was adopted as is. I don't think there would be any, or there shouldn't be any investment fund manager in Luxembourg that is looking at a big pile of trouble. That being said, I think the organization and the governance and the delegation oversight, that is something that the CSDF really checks as part of the general oversight. And they also check if what we have included in an application file is actually put into practice. So the CSDF makes on-site visits, even, by the way, at firms that were just licensed. So a couple of months after they have received their license, the CSDF can go in and check. And they usually have findings. So I think people should be prepared for that. The new self-assessment questionnaire that has been published at the end of last year is a great tool for that in order to prepare for basically CSF expectation. But people can also do mock inspections. So basically invite third parties such as consulting firms, law firms, Arendt, but also others, to sort of prepare for an actual CSF on-site inspection. And that there is actually an Arendt webinar tomorrow on that. So maybe if you haven't, to the participants, if you haven't subscribed to that, maybe that is something that you would be willing to do for tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's worth mentioning. So in a nutshell, indeed, the proposal as it is would probably not be a revolution, indeed, because we expect that many, if not all, management companies are compliant. Of course, the proposal speaks about the condition to be complied with upon authorization, but that's exactly the point you made. There is no reason that our regulator would change the practice, and the concrete application would need to be reviewed and to be ensured and by the regulator upon the on-site visit, indeed. And so let's probably stay on that positive note. Also, I cannot, as a lawyer, refrain myself to keep in mind the fact that this proposal would result, obviously, in a law to be implemented in Luxembourg. And all these conditions that, of course, are already applicable to Luxembourg UCITS management company would equally be applicable, but maybe where there would have been a little bit of room for flexible approach or even some kind of proportionality, I have not seen that this would still be necessarily the case in the context of the proposal. So concretely speaking, we would need to see the impact thereof. Another key topic, which is of course very important, is delegation. The industry was, of course, concerned that the entire delegation model, which has been tented in the Brexit process, and they really continue to wonder whether that delegation model, which has been part of the success of the UCITS, could be challenged, because, of course, everyone acknowledged and recognized that delegation is, of course, ensuring an efficient portfolio management via the use of specific expertise in given markets or asset classes. So any change there to be expected, or would you be as optimistic as you are on the substance condition in terms of the delegation model?
Well, yes and no. So I think the proposals include that there has to be a detailed presentation for delegations to third parties, and that needs to be this presentation needs to be provided to the regulator, including a detailed presentation of the human and technical resources that investment fund managers apply to monitor and control their delegates. And this isn't really new. I mean, this also is something that is included in application files, and that is included in notifications that go to the regulator if you seek to outsource a certain function. What is new is that now national competent authorities need to report to ESMA, where they see setups where there's more delegation of portfolio management and risk management to third countries than what is retained within an investment fund manager. I think AIFMs may be less impacted by that because it was already forbidden to delegate both risk management and portfolio management at the same time. What we have also seen, notably in the context of Brexit, is that the CSF was questioning the level of substance left within an investment fund manager. And you will remember from the files that we had that many substance and delegation models that have been discussed with the CSSF were also discussed between the CSF and ESMA at the time. And that makes me think that the general substance and delegation setup for each and every file was already part of an assessment that was made by the CSF on that concrete file. But I mean, we will see in practice how it turns out to be.
Indeed. So thank you very much. So I believe it's again very encouraging. There was that concept of letterbox entity, of course, which was probably more pregnant in the AIFMD framework because of that dichotomy where there was a clear choice to be made between the ability to delegate portfolio management versus risk management, which was not necessarily the way it was and it is implemented in the UCITS framework, where, however, the concept of letterbox entity is also in existence, but not applied in the same way. This being said, I see potentially a room for an additional threat, but you will let me know what you think about it, with the fact that besides the concept of letterbox entity, there is no a need or an expectation that entire delegation structure would be justified by or for objective reasons. So what would be your consideration there?
The objective reasons part that was indeed not included in sort of the UCITS ManCos legislative regime, but it was included in already included in the AIFM regulation, and that's basically since roughly 10 years. So I'm not worried by that. I think there's a good reason for delegating. For now, I think the notification obligation for regulators is the interesting thing. But again, I mean, it remains to be seen what the further impact this has on delegation arrangements. Also, because the Commission is entrusted to adopt measures to specify conditions under which a management company would indeed to have delegated its function to an extent that it actually becomes a letterbox entity. I think that clarification that needs to come, and then we are in a better position to indeed have a position on that.
Yeah, without mentioning, of course, the fact that ESMA would be reporting about the application of the regime within the 2 years' time, so which could again lead to additional consideration. So do you want to comment briefly on the application of the same expectation in terms of delegation when it goes about top-up so-called MiFID additional functions?
So what the proposal says is that basically the same delegation rules apply also when you delegate functions that are part of the MiFID top-up that ManCos and AIFMs can apply for. But also this is a new CSF already, to me it is a new CSF already required a notification, and they also required that investment fund managers apply oversight in case they delegate part of the activities, be it a MiFID top-up activity or be it an activity that is included in the annex of the 2010 law or the 2013 law. Also, I remember that there was a conference in this building actually with Pascal Berchem, in which he said that anything that is done by third parties on behalf of an investment fund manager, so an activity that normally the investment fund manager would do itself, but that is delegated to a third party, that should be subject to proper control. And I think that is the very essence of good governance, if basically ensuring that things that are done for you, that they are done right. Maybe just to give one example, it has nothing to do with MiFID actually, but if you take the activity of IT, for instance, we see that in many cases the IT is not with investment fund managers in Luxembourg, but that it is delegated in many cases. It is delegated to group entities based elsewhere in the EU or in the UK. Or Switzerland. And what we see actually there in many cases is that it is not overseen from Luxembourg in a way that the CSSF would like it to be overseen. And in many cases also, there is no contract or no agreement basically built around this service provision from group entities or other non-group entities. And I think that is something that should change.
Okay, thank you very much for this insight, which is very helpful, and we will certainly continue to discuss that at a later stage. So let's maybe go to the liquidity risk management piece of the proposal. And Alexandre, could you please explain what does the proposal say in terms of liquidity risk management, and what are the new expectations for UCITS management company?
Thank you, Florence. Basically, the proposal amending both AIFMD and UCITS directive introduces the concept of a liquidity management tool, which have to be used and implemented by both open-ended alternative investment fund and UCITS structures. Such tools are foreseen to mitigate liquidity risk that open-ended funds may face during stress market conditions and to ultimately protect the shareholders. As part of the proposal, we can also mention that a list of available liquidity management tool, or LMT, is proposed in annex, and those ones are commonly already in place in the various open-ended structure in Europe. If we can list some of them, for example, the gate mechanisms, the suspension of redemption, the swing prices mechanism.
Okay, how is it expected by the Commission that this would be concretely implemented by the UCITS management company?
Practically, based on the proposal, it requires that at least one of the LMT listed in the annex is implemented by alternative investment fund manager or the UCITS ManCos, according to the strategy, the liquidity profile, and the redemption policy of the funds. Moreover, what is important to take into consideration is that such LMTs may be activated at two levels. The first one is directly by the AIFM or the UCITS ManCos. They can decide to activate the LMT, and then they should notify the relevant national competent authority or HCA. The other way to activate this tool will directly come from the relevant NCA, which may instruct alternative investment fund manager or UCITS ManCos to activate or deactivate such LMTs.
Okay, and as a practitioner, which challenge do you see in these new requirements?
For me, the main challenge will be first to select the best LMT fitting with the investment strategy, the liquidity profile, and redemption policies of the fund under management, while ensuring the best interest of the shareholders. After that, from an operational point of view, alternative investment fund manager and UCITS ManCos will have to implement proper policy and procedure with regard to the activation and deactivation of such tool, including operational and administrative arrangement. Another point is that such LMT should be also disclosed in the fund rules or the instruments offering operations of the AIFM or UCITS ManCos. Finally, not the least, the possibility for AIFMs to receive instruction for activating such LMT at a large scale is quite new, as it integrates the notion of financial stability risk to justify such action from competent authorities. As a consequence, as part of the policy and procedure to be put in place, AIFM will have to take into consideration such activations, which can be requested by competent authorities.
Okay. So there are probably different angles to this new proposal. First of all, indeed, an assessment at the level of the UCITS management companies, but we would expect that this would need to be discussed with the funds themselves as to the type of tools to be identified. There would be a need of disclosure of these tools in the fund documents, which is quite stringent, I would say. And also, as you mentioned, additional processes and operational to be put in place in order to monitor probably the appropriateness of these tools and the fact that they're used. And indeed, this additional level of interaction with regulators, which could impose, if I understand you correctly, the use of these tools. So it's a quite different approach and momentum, if I understand correctly. But would you say that it could imply, and that's probably an ongoing theme of the AIFMD review, but would you expect that it could imply additional power to be granted to ESMA, as a case may be?
Yes, indeed. If we refer to the proposal, it does imply more power for ESMA, having the possibility to instruct at EU level the activation of such LMTs. However, we have to keep in mind that such additional powers as proposed in the amendment, are given with the objective to strengthen ESMA's ability to ensure financial stability, and especially in case of stress market condition, as we may have observed with the COVID crisis.
Okay, and an additional point, I believe, which is probably to be further clarified, is all these interaction between the management companies, the home member state regulator, and also to some extent the host member regulator, because I understand that there are some kind of obligation of notification in terms of activation and deactivation of these tools, which would need to be at least to the home regulator, but also to some extent to the host regulator, with also some kind of cooperation, additional cooperation between the two regulators. Do you see that as a specific notification, or would you consider this to be very similar to something already in existence?
I would expect that ultimately it may result in a specific kind of notification to be addressed by UCITS ManCos to national competent authorities in case they are going to activate or deactivate LMT. However, if we talk about what we have here in Luxembourg, it may have a similar format as the one already in use, especially through the system of AIFM notifications related to fund issues or large redemptions, that it's already filled through the eDesk module of the CSSF website.
Mm-hmm. By reading this new provision in the directive, I wonder and state probably that this is part of the whole risk management process, and probably expectation of a proper and fit risk management process would go beyond that. So, which kind of broader action would you see in that context?
I would say that it will, let's say, it will be integrated, I think, clearly in the risk management framework of alternative investment fund on UCITS ManCos, and it will be clearly for me a core part of this framework. And it will have then at the end to be annually assessed and reviewed in order to ensure that it covers all the risk faced by the fund under management of the AIFM or the UCITS ManCos. Moreover, if we make a quick reference to the CSSF Circular 19733, which is related to liquidity management, you can see here that in fact liquidity management tools were already in place, and then they were part of what they call contingency plan, and then it was planned that it has to be tested. Okay. Furthermore, to say regarding the next step that we may are waiting for now is clearly that we can see in the proposals that ESMA has been tasked to develop some RTS in order to provide harmonized definition on consistent characteristic of the different LMT, which are proposed in Annex, and this is to be ensure consistency between all European regulations. So in that case, we can see that we will have a kind of fair treatment between investment fund manager. Furthermore, the RTS will also cover the aspect related to the disclosure about the implemented LMT to be made to the investors. And this being said, we adopted that practitioner will carefully follow any further development on ESMA publications on this topic during the following months.
Okay, and we could of course discuss, but that could be made at another occasion, whether all the tools which have been mentioned, of course, are really appropriate in a UCITS environment. The side pocket is probably something which is quite interesting, I would say, to say the least. We all remember that this might have been implemented a long time ago in 2008, but subject to very strict conditions. So probably further to be discussed in terms of the tools which are proposed, whether they are appropriate, whether additional tools might have been appropriate also to be proposed, and also whether the concept which have been integrated there in terms of swing pricing notably would be totally in line with what is already in existence. But as said, probably to be further discussed at next occasion. So we have mentioned that these were really the three main topics of the review: delegation, substance, and also liquidity risk management tools. Jasper, there were two additional proposals in terms of change, which are worth to be mentioned. Do you want to cover them, please? Jasper, we do not hear you.
Apologies. We know that the AIFMD supervisory reporting regime will be reviewed and that it will be introduced for UCITS. So we will supposedly see an alignment there of reporting requirements in order to avoid reporting duplications for asset managers, probably that have both licenses. And we also see a standardization of reportings in terms of data standard, in terms of frequency, in terms of timing. I think this is the ambition, really. And what we see on top of that is basically that the central securities depositories will be included in the custody chain when they provide custody services to ensure that depositories have access to the information that they need to carry out their activities. And at the same time, CSDs do not need to be subject to an ex-ante due diligence by the depository itself, because they are vetted when they seek authorization to act as CSD. I think that's actually, I mean, this is good news for depositories, probably not so relevant for investment fund managers. I like the logic of not needing to do a due diligence because you use someone who is already authorized by a regulator, but it seems that is not, I mean, that would be a nice thing as well for AIFMs and UCITS ManCos that make use of already authorized entities.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I would like maybe to make a pause here and to take a little bit of time to answer to the question which might have been raised. So Jasper, since you were covering new expectation in terms of reporting, which are indeed going towards harmonization of the framework, and as far as possible to avoid duplication, I was a little bit puzzled by that requirement, which is now imposed on UCITS management company. What would be the impact thereof for UCITS management company which are delegating portfolio management? I think on third-party management company, obviously, but also on many others which use portfolio manager. Does that mean double reporting in that area?
The reporting requirement that will be introduced for UCITS ManCos is a reporting requirement on markets and transactions that already is in place for AIFs. And what we see there is that it indeed applies for AIFM, regardless of the fact whether or not they delegate portfolio managers or not. What the proposals say is that that the Commission, so the European legislator, that they want to ensure there is no duplication of reportings and no duplications of efforts. So I think to that extent, also here the European Commission is tasked with tailoring this new regime through delegated and implementing acts based on recommendations again from ESMA. And I think that is indeed something that should be taken into account.
Yeah, correct. Otherwise, we would not necessarily go into the direction of economies of scales, definitely. Maybe a question for you, Alexandre. There was a question about the link to be made between these new expectations in terms of liquidity risk tools and what could be existing for the time being in the framework, in the liquidity management framework, and and probably a link with already existing circular. How would you see that from a global perspective as risk manager?
Well, the concept of liquidity measurement tool is not new as itself. It has been introduced in the circular in 1933 by the CSDs, which is directly linking to the IOSCO recommendations, where such LMT on some kind of LMT as proposed in the amending proposal were already mentioned. And at this stage, it was only offered like a possibility for the alternative investment fund manager or UCITS ManCos to implement such tool. However, you can also mention that, for example, when issued ESMA guidelines on the liquidity stress testing, the LMT were already also present, where clearly it is mentioned that if you have some LMT, they have to be part of your overall process, especially for liquidity stress testing. So the concept itself is not new. What is new now is that clearly you have a kind of list of which tool can be implemented. And on top of that, what I think the most important is that we are expecting to get some clear regulatory technical standards, giving guidelines on those tools themselves, on how to implement them, at the level of investment fund managers.
So clearly an area where we should watch and wait for further guidance, definitely. Yeah. Thank you very much. Maybe a very last one for you, Jasper. There was some changes being introduced in the depository passport for the AIFM, and the question here was to know whether there was a similar attempt in the UCITS framework.
No, there is not. So what we know from the AIFMD 2 proposal is that competent authorities will be permitted to allow AIFs established in their jurisdiction to select a depository that is established in another member state. It's not a depository passport, and it's also just, I mean, they are allowed, so there's no real harmonization to that extent, and that we didn't find in the UCITS proposal.
Okay, thank you very much. With this, I'm afraid that we are reaching the end of our discussion of today. So as you may have understood, the first assessment we have made of the proposal does not seem to raise too many concerns from a Luxembourg perspective. Of course, as usual, this is a proposal. We are waiting, and the industry is waiting for the further Level 2, Level 3 guidance to be prepared by ESMA. And of course, we hope, as usual, that nothing will go beyond Level 1. This being said, let's keep in mind and pay attention to, first of all, the potential strict interpretation of substance requirements, the need to evidence the objective reason for delegation, and also the subsequent reporting obligation in case of important delegation, as well as the new processes and monitoring to be implemented in the context of liquidity management tools. And of course, specific attention will need to be paid to all the technical standards that ESMA will need to issue in different areas, and more particularly in the context of the reporting that ESMA will be done after implementation, and which could, as usual, open the door to further development. So we will certainly keep you posted of any new developments. Further webinar will for sure be organized in the future as soon as we will have some further news on the outcome of this proposal. In the meantime, we would like to thank you for your attendance, participation, and we remain, of course, available for any question you would have. We wish you a great afternoon. Thank you very much.